Hello, my name is Jennifer Lewinsky, and my presentation today will be over the PLA and the CCP, which is the People's Liberation Army and the Chinese Communist Party. It's going to cover a glance at the Tiananmen Square incident on June 4th, 1989, and how civil-military relations have changed since then. Here is a brief overview of what I will be covering. The background, which will be split into two different parts, rebellions and revolutions, and the PLA from the era of Mao Zedong to Xi Jinping. Going to go over an analysis, which is the actual incident at Tiananmen Square from May through June, the aftermath and consolidation of power under Xi Jinping, and we will conclude. I will forewarn you a little bit that there is a lot of information that goes along with this. Much of it will be truncated. It's kind of like a really brief overview, so if you do have questions, please do not hesitate to ask. I can definitely relay more info in the discussion area. My bachelor's is in Asian Studies, so I'm quite well versed with this material. And when talking about the CCP and the government structure of China, it can become really confusing really fast. So please, if you have any questions, ask and I will try to clarify them for you. So on this slide, before I get into the background info, I am going to cover the significance of this event and of using China as an example for their civil-military relations. To begin, China is emerging as #1 economically, and the military is becoming a rival of the U.S. forces within Asia because of its size and capability. Obviously, size-wise, still not quite as big, but if you look down here in the left-hand corner, there is the global military spending in 2018. China is still about 22% behind the U.S., but if you look at the progression over time, over the last 20 years of China's defense spending, it has significantly increased. So because of China's economic position, allies and enemies are likely to be affected, as well as local and provincial leadership under Xi's consolidation efforts. And what I mean by affected is globally in terms of things that go on within the country and things that go on outside of the country. The PLA does serve the role as international and state security, foregoing any domestic issues, although the case that I'm going to highlight in this presentation is kind of the opposite because they did get involved in a domestic dispute, but there's reasons for that. Xi Jinping's consolidation of power is strengthening the party control and loyalty to the party. There was an author in the early 80s, Ellis Joff, I'm not sure if it's Joff or Joffe. He kind of highlighted some of the models that directly related to China's civ-mil relations. He highlights 6 different models that are, I guess, best for explaining. I'm just going to briefly go over them, and this covers from 1949 through 1997. And this is integration at the top, which is considered interpenetration of the party and the military. The next one was separation at the bottom, and this is separation from military and politics at the group army level and below. The next phase was modernization and professionalism, and this is the basis for separation of military and party. The next phase, political control of the PLA. This is similar to the penetration phase and includes ideological education of military and the oversight of decision-making process within the military. The 5th one is command and control of the PLA. This is a top-down system that takes power out of the lower level commander's hands. And the 6th one is the non-interventionist, and this is used to describe it because The PLA has only used force politically when ordered by Mao Zedong during the Cultural Revolution or Deng Xiaoping during the Tiananmen Square incident, which we will highlight over the next few slides. And then lastly, there was a bit of high volume publicity of this incident in 1989 because there was a large amount of foreign media presence in Beijing due to Mikhail Gorbachev's visit and the Asian Development Bank meeting that was going on at the time within Beijing. So this slide covers the background, the first part of background, which is rebellions and revolutions. So if you've studied anything about China, you will notice that China has been in a near constant state of revolution within the 20th century, ever since the fall of the Qing dynasty and the death of Empress Dowager Cixi, and also the Boxer Rebellion in the early 1900s. After the Qing dynasty fell, Sun Yat-sen became president. They tried to make China a republic. He was succeeded by Chiang Kai-shek, who was a nationalist, and then another prominent person began their rise to power, and that was Mao Zedong, who was side with the communists. The Civil War happened. It stopped because of World War II, so they could band together and fight against Japan and the other invaders. And then as soon as World War II ended, the Civil War started right back up between the nationalists and communists. 1949 rolls around, Mao Zedong is successful, communism takes its grip within China, and with the rise of communism came successive revolutions under Mao Zedong until his death in the 1970s, and he was replaced by Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping began a series of reforms, a lot of different reforms, but the ones I'm going to focus on here are the economic reforms. The economic reforms led to a decreased role of the state in the economy and increased in privatization. It worked, but it also led to severe inflation and disproportionate market economy, which was geared more towards private gains. The bourgeois had basically a unfair advantage within the market, and they had split the market, and they were taking everything and selling it for way more, causing a lot of economic problems within the country. Hu Yaobang, and I'm sorry, it's been a few years since I've pronounced a lot of these names, so if I get them incorrect, I greatly apologize. He was the general secretary, and he was pro-democracy. He had sided with protesters. There were movements that had begun in 1986, and he had took what they termed as a soft stance, and he had sympathized with the protesters because of his soft stance against and his pro-democracy, I guess, not severe interaction, but the fact that he didn't do a whole lot against. He was forced to resign in 1987, and the protests continued off and on throughout that time, kind of trying to adopt a Western style of government and adopt capitalist more so than what they already did in terms of the economy to try to make things a little bit better. In 1989, this was April of 1989, Yaobang died of a heart attack, and the students and protesters that had been working for the last few years, this was kind of like a catalyst for them. They had already been, participating in demonstrations, but his death, and that's his picture down in the bottom right-hand corner, his death caused a chain reaction of events that led to the Tiananmen Square incident in June of 1989. Before that, it was like a slow building of massive protests, starting from a couple thousand university students to upwards of 10, 20, 30,000 people, not just students, people from all over China coming to throw their support behind the pro-democracy movement. So this slide covers the second part of the background, which is the People's Liberation Army from the time of Mao Zedong to Xi Jinping, who is the current leader in China. Corruption and nepotism have consistently run rampant within the PLA, recalling Joffe's different models that include interpenetration of the party in the military. That's kind of part of why it is. And then you have the party and the state are very interdependent on each other. So some would argue they are one and the same. And because the PLA goes directly to the state, in a sense, the PLA and the CCP are almost symbiotic, if you will. So the international and state security is the primary goal of the PLA, especially during what there are quite a few names for the incidents in 1989. They call it the Tiananmen Square Uprising, the Tiananmen Square Incident, Tiananmen Square Massacre, the Spring and Summer Uprisings of 1989. I mean, there are tons of names. So yeah, you're going to see a lot of these, and I apologize if they get confusing. But yeah, international and state security was the role of the PLA during this time. There were other bodies that existed in China that are similar in nature to the PLA. They are the PAP, which is the People's Armed Police. This is technically the group that should have controlled the protesters, but they were unable to do so. So the PLA was then ordered to come in and take control because the PAP was unable to. The other two organizations are the MPS, which is the Ministry of Public Security. They are in charge of domestic law enforcement, and they oversee the local and provincial level police. The last one is the MSS. That is the Ministry of State Security. They are China's intelligence and counterintelligence agency. The PAP, I also want to note, is under direct CCP control, and it is, as I mentioned before, responsible for domestic issues. And the aftermath of I'm gonna get to the aftermath after I explain the Tiananmen incident. But in the aftermath, the PAP did receive quite a bit more funding than the PLA, so not an uncommon thing we've seen in other instances. All right, this slide covers the Tiananmen Square from May through June 1989, and it's an analysis of it. So the party was divided into two different groups, hardliners and the moderates. The hardliners were against reforms and the moderates were pro-reform. The PLA hesitated quite a bit in taking sides, especially in the beginning, because of the fact that the actual CCP was split. So you're going to see who they were led by. The CMC, which is the Central Military Commission chairman, that was Deng Xiaoping. Now, even though he was technically only the CMC chairman, he was considered the, I think, supreme leader is what they called it. So Deng Xiaoping did have a huge role to play within the party after Mao Zedong's death until he stepped down in the early 90s. The moderates were led by the CCP General Secretary, which was Zhao Ziyang. He is an integral figure. The CCP General Secretary is typically what the leader, whoever the leader is of China is, that's usually the role that they fill. So right now, Xi Jinping, he is the premier, president, whatever, but he's also the CCP General Secretary and the CMC chairman, which we'll get into later. So because two high-ranking officials within the CCP were split, the PLA didn't know what to do. It was kind of like instances we've read of other places where they kind of just sit back and wait and see who's going to win this one. Some soldiers did like when they started calling them in to try to disperse people, At first, it was initially just to make sure they didn't run the buildings and stuff in the Forbidden City. So some soldiers actually linked arms with protesters to join them in solidarity. I think it was an estimated 1,000 people that were PLA members that did so. Officers were hesitant to use force against the people. And then we're going to fast forward to May 20th, because like I said, in April is when a lot of the bulk of this started, and then it was slowly gaining traction. May 20th, Premier Li Peng declared martial law, and the PLA on June 3rd was ordered to disperse crowds by any means necessary. This meant they started rolling in tanks. If you look in the background, the picture that is in the background, if you've read anything about Tiananmen Square, I guarantee you've seen this picture. This is a picture of Tank Man. Tank Man was a protester who, once the tank started rolling in, he literally ran out into the middle of the road and would not move. He let the tank approach him. So after the officers were hesitant to use force, there were letters before the PLA was ordered to disperse the crowds. There were letters from retired PLA elders that begged for restraint of the current PLA officers and troops and reminded the high command that they were the People's Liberation Army, not the party's Liberation Army. So it's kind of a warning from former people to don't attack the people. It's you're there for the people, not to go against them. Deng Xiaoping was absolutely furious with Party Secretary Ziyang for siding with the protesters. Then, as I said, Premier Li Peng declared martial law. PLA was ordered to clear the city square. There is controversy over the death toll. There still is no for sure number. The death toll ranges from a few hundred people to 10,000. The 10,000 number is a recent number that came out, I think it was 2 decades after the incident, and it was based on cables released from a UK representative that was in the country at the time. Okay, this next slide covers another part of the analysis, which is the aftermath of the massacre. The PLA ended up breaking a 50-year trust it had with the people of China. This led to stronger political ties, increased corruption and nepotism. Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao were the two following CMC chairmen who were in control of the military. Once they came in, they attempted to gain better control over the PLA because there were some issues. I'm going to skip over this next one. Skip over the next two, I'm sorry. There was a huge investigation launched of PLA members because there were quite a few suspected of disobeying orders and or abandoning their posts when they were ordered to clear out Tiananmen Square. So this left kind of a negative feel with the party leadership because that is dissent, and as you can see, what dissent leads to, it leads to huge protests and potential to overthrow governments or things like that. So that also ended press freedom in China, led to a mass arrest of dissidents and protesters, and the event had a lasting impact internationally and domestically. Domestically, it still is in the minds of people, and internationally, because of the increased foreign media presence, every bit of this was internationally televised. So it's not something that can be like, oh, it didn't happen. No, it absolutely did, and the entire world was watching as it happened. So this slide consists of the last part of analysis, which is the consolidation of power under Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping has initiated a series of reforms that have completely reorganized the military structure in an attempt to root out corruption and nepotism and absolutely deposing of it. He has also concentrated on centralization of power, taking from the local, provincial, and ministerial oversight in an attempt to contain and eliminate opposition and dissent within the mainland. This reduces the chance of uprisings and or, you guessed it, coups. If you have no opposition, you literally are the supreme ruler. You can't, you have nothing to fear. So the PLA has become more professional since 1989, especially under Xi. But this also means they have become more politically intertwined with the CCP, even though the political and the military leaders are more separated than they have ever been. This happened after Hu Jintao and oh gosh, I can't remember his name now. The other guy, I'm sorry. After they had increased power over the military. So the CMC head no longer served in the military, and officers in prominent CMC positions only have military experience, not experience within the political arena. So this is the conclusion slide. The PLA has had much variety regarding political influence and control, nearly always putting its power into the state party hands. Even with increased professionalism in the post-1989 era, that also includes increased autonomy. Xi's era is ushering in very good things for the military. They're less corrupt, less nepotism, but also at the expense of local and provincial control. So it makes that causes the military to become more loyal to the state by default. It's not like there's a whole bunch of indoctrination going. I'm not going to say there's none because that would be a lie, but just the way he's restructuring the system, the PLA is automatically going to become loyal to him because he's making it much better for them to serve. Like we had talked about, giving them more incentive and benefits. The last part, yeah, it's just a question, and it's kind of what will the future of China's civil-military relations hold? Because it has been a very up and down, interesting roller coaster thus far. I'm curious to see where it will go from here. And this last slide is all of my sources. I want to thank you. Sorry, I went over about 2 minutes, but I want to thank you all for watching this, and good luck in the rest of your program. Thank you.